Raj Kamal Jha, editor-in-chief of the Indian Express. Few know that he was born in Bihar, went to school in Kolkata, and then to study mechanical engineering in IIT Kharagpur. He then went off to California to get his master's degree in journalism. Since 1990, he's worked in newsrooms in The Statesman, India Today, and then came up the ranks in the Indian Express to become editor-in-chief. Raj has written 5 novels. The last one is The City and the Sea. His writing is possibly, I'm going to promote shamelessly. The last one is The City and the Sea. His writing is possibly the most delicate style I have read, but searing, sharp, and it's a killer. It's gut-wrenching. Welcome, Raj. We've finally been able to get him. Aatish Taseer, I think everyone knows, a prolific writer. He worked for Time magazine, has written 6 books, numerous articles, has studied Urdu and Sanskrit. His latest book, The Twice Born, Life and Death on the Ganges. I can't say Ganges. I have to say Ganga. He's written Ganges. Okay. This book took him to Varanasi and he met revered teachers of Sanskrit there. It is a book about how we, the ex-elite or elite, were brought up and taught. He speaks to the layers of our cross-pollinated ancestry and culture, so-called culture. Prayaag worked at Outlook magazine, was an editor at Scroll. His first book, Laila, published last year, has been made into a Netflix series. Laila is a sniper shot, carefully crafted to expose without exposing oneself. Welcome, Prayaag. This is Aatish's book. It's available outside, and Prayaag's Laila. I'm promoting it because they're great books. I don't get a cut out of it or anything if anyone's suspicious. We're really lucky to have Raj Kamal Jha, who aggressively keeps a low profile, following the cardinal rule of journalism that we are not the story. While researching his background, I was surprised to find on his bio page something I had written about him. And this was the ending of I had written an open letter to Arnab Goswami. After I finished jharoing, scolding Arnab, the last bit I said, P.S., homework for you, Arnab. Please watch Raj Kamal Jha's speeches at the Ramnath Goenka Awards events. Last year attended by Prime Minister Modi and this year by Vice President Venkaiah Naidu. Jha speaks truth to power. That is a journalist's job. You, meaning Arnab, speak to the lowest common denominator of us all. Close quote. When you gave those 2 speeches, Raj, I saw Prime Minister Modi get uncomfortable and Vice President Venkaiah Naidu squirm. My reaction was, Raj is getting fired. You put yourself in a dangerous place. How do you maintain this independence despite pressures one is aware of? What happened after the speech, before we get to your book? What was the fallout?
I'm still the chief editor. No, I think we really exaggerate or we demonize the world out there. I'll be a little less melodramatic. I think, what I said in both the speeches was essentially journalism 101. We were taught in school. I remember distinctly my first session in journalism. I went from IIT to do my MA in journalism, and that was very basic. You have to be accurate, you have to be fair to the story, and the people in power, be it in the government or business or finance or art or business or culture or media, do not want you to tell a story that makes them look stupid or makes them look bad. And your job is to be fair. I was very lucky to work in newsrooms where these are very strong values. And when we are talking about identities, the health of a newsroom, and given that I am the only one here who has to go back to office and get the paper out, I will shamelessly use that to my thing, saying that, look, every healthy newsroom depends on a network of relationships, which are, for example, the reporter and the source. It's a very sacred relationship. It's based on faith. I will tell you things which you will never tell the world I told you. So one. The reporter and the editor, we are in love with each other, but I will be adversarial when I see your story. I'm going to ask you 100 things about your story. Then the editor and the owner. That's also a very sacred relationship. He or she pays my salary, but I need that space. So how do I navigate that? The relationship between advertising and marketing. So these are different identities at play in the newsroom, and you have to handle that. Now, what has happened in the last 5 or 6 years is that there is social media, which has nuked all these relationships. And we are yet to come up with a new definition. So we have the editor, who is the owner, who is the anchor, who is the reporter, who is the writer. The reason why Arnab Goswami, as you mentioned, he gets away is because there is no one in the newsroom with the moral or
to check
the power hierarchy to tell him in his earpiece, shut up. It is as simple, and you find that in news organizations across the landscape. You have people sitting at 9 o'clock who have stakes in the news organization.
Checking, double-checking, questioning.
Who also own it. If I sit, like, for example, tonight, Jammu and Kashmir is the main story. If I fly to Srinagar, and I say, I am the chief editor, I need to do the story, it nukes all the relationships. So I think, as you said, the layers of identity and how did you get away? I did not get away. I am very lucky to work in a newsroom where I do not have veto power. There are other people in the room, there are other identities, since we're talking about that identities, that there are other people who can stand up and disagree. Most of the time, the newspaper has stuff that I tend to agree with. But there are certain editorials I do not agree with, but my team does. And I think that is very important. I think what the reason why at the Indian Express we can do the things we do is because we respect these relationships.
But you must have the final word on stories, not on editorial, but on stories.
Yeah.
If you are disagreeing with someone who say doesn't have enough material, doesn't have the other side, is not being fair, has an agenda, you see a plant.
Absolutely.
All these issues.
Absolutely.
You will have the final word.
I completely agree with you. We have done stories. I have kept those things with me on the phone, where I have been told that, hey, you sold out to the government. How did you let that get in? And we have been told, just the opposite. But at the end of the day, and once again, I want to underline this, that yes, of course I have. I can say no. And that is easy. But the fact that I don't need to wear my designation on my sleeve in the newsroom is a great space I have in the mind.
No, you've created that, Raj. Not every editor has that
but I think
authority.
the institution does. I think the institution.
Yes, you're part of an institution that does.
It is very tough to create those spaces. You're
yes,
right.
Yes.
Because
there are editors who people smirk at as soon as he walks out of the room. He's a joke. We know all those. So it's an individual space that you have, luckily we're lucky to hear this description.
But as
it's
I
not
said,
common.
But as I said, I do that space because I don't have anyone who calls me at night to check what the front page is. The man who pays my salary doesn't call me at night.
Now, Aatish, you wrote an article for Time magazine, which got you a lot of flack, including death threats. which is why I'm sitting one removed. So, while you were writing it, you're obviously aware of what the fallout is going to be. Or are you aware? Are you just writing regardless?
No. It was sort of leftover. It was a kind of rejected piece from the New York Times, and I had a friend who was like, "Oh, do you know anyone who could write about the election?" And I was like, "Why don't you take a look at this as a pitch?" And he's like, "Oh, this is wonderful. Do you mind if we rework it?" And at the time, I was actually
Time magazine reworks it to completely.
And I was actually working on a profile of Imran Khan, which is coming out in a month or so, and that was far more important to me. And sort of in kind of my side view mirror, this thing was like, oh, we love it, we might put it on the cover, then we might, whatever, and one thing led to another, and so absolutely not. Like, I had no idea till the reaction happened that it was going to go down like that, like a lead balloon.
You have been peeling the layers of your identity through your books, starting from the first one, where people recognize themselves.
No,
then,
Stranger to History. Nobody recognized themselves there. That was the first one.
I don't know. Maybe people were projecting. Maybe it's like Carly Simon's song, You're So Vain, where many people thought that they were in it. Okay. But your books take you from your internal journey to the external, such as The Twice Born. I mean, it's really a search of yourself, your identity of yourself, with also previous books where you sort of worked through your childhood, your search for your father, your estrangement with your father, is books on Islam, and your estrangement with a lot of... So it's coming together and pulling away, coming together and pulling away. Now this book, again, you studied Sanskrit, you went to Varanasi to meet with Sanskrit scholars, and were exposed to an area that you have been, I think, struggling with, moving away again from your Indian identity and then coming back home to it, or not. How does the internal journey actually affect your external, or does your external journey, how does it work for you? Because here people see you after Narendra Modi's article in a very different light. And then here I read this book, where which is almost like a Hindu book.
Loved. It was Ram Madhav and Wendy Doniger.
So it's a Sanskrit Hindu book searching the Vedas.
No, see, I think there was somebody on before us, and Mom has talked about this. You know, the world is full of variety. The world is there's a story everywhere, but you're always looking for something there's a kind of internal spring, and when that thing is answered in the world, when you have a situation that corresponds to like an inner tension, then you know it's your material. Then you know it's something to go after.
Aatish, you make everybody your material. People have to be careful with your relatives.
You are my...
There are people who stop talking to you.
One's relatives, and you too, Madhu. You're my direct material. I grew up around you.
Yes.
I mean, if I was not able to look at you, I could not look at like people beyond my world. So no, I think people are very reluctant about that in India. They're like, oh, it's very personal. It's very... Writing should be personal. It should start very near to you, and you should be able to see things that later take you further and further away from your world. And you have to understand, Stranger to History, the whole sweep of the Muslim world was connected to a personal antagonism. With this book, it's very narrow, but it's about lives that are very far away from mine. And I think what interests me, or what I look for, is the idea, and it's very important in a society like this one, is distance. Not huge physical distances. Here we are sitting in an auditorium. We're very near to each other. But with each of these people, on the level of upbringing, on the level of values, on the level of history, of caste, there can be like the gulf of centuries. And to understand that distance and to respect it and to work along that line, I think is very important for a society as varied as this to come to an idea of wholeness or of understanding. And that's what I try to do, really.
But in earlier books, you have gotten very personal about people and hurt people's feelings. My personal assessment is that in this book, you've grown out of that. There is, in my assessment again, there's a maturity where you're able to observe the difference, observe even obviously people that are making you uncomfortable, physical situations that have made you uncomfortable, where you can't breathe in a certain area and with the smell and all that's going on. But there is still a level of a difference that I see, is that you're now accepting the difference and learning.
I think the difference is that you were very near yourself personally to one well of material, and you're not near to this material, because people read a book like The Way Things Were in America, and they don't know the models, and they can only see the themes. You know, Proust's great work, the character that he uses for Charlus is a man called Montesquieu, who never went out into society again because he was so wounded by what Proust had done with him.
So you're wounding people. Doesn't that wound you?
It doesn't wound me if I'm not trying to wound them. I think if a book is personal, if it's an attack, if it's Reham Khan's book on Imran Khan, like, those books only go that far. There's no reason, there's no way in God's earth that a publisher sitting in New York would publish a book that was an act of vengeance against the little world of Delhi that you and I know.
But they won't know it is.
Has been blown
they
away.
Won't know it is. They won't. Your publisher in New York will not know the little nuances that we know and recognize.
Which is fine, which is the test. If a book travels, if it can work, that means that there are other themes working through it. It's just that you can see the material, and in a sense that makes you a difficult reader, because you shouldn't be able to see through the cast of fiction. But there are people who can't, because it's too far away.
I see them as, having read all your books up as they've evolved, I see you as a person who's publicly evolving. Your internal is publicly, as you learn, as you expose yourself, it also, while you're exploring now Sanskrit and the teachers of the gurus who you went and visited, it's really exposing a side of, the most remarkable thing about this book is acknowledging how distant we are, especially my generation, yours a little less. As you go go to the millennial generation, I think they're far more in touch with India, the language, regional languages. We are the most removed. And I think the most important thing you have exposed in this book is the post-colonial damage that was done to my generation in terms of language and culture.
You don't have to. There was a time, maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago in this country, where we could speak nostalgically about your isolation or your distance. We could say, wouldn't it be nice to know one's culture a bit more, or whatever. But now that distance that you sat at has been blown away by politics. That distance has become, because there were other people on the side of that gulf. It wasn't just you wishing to bridge
Aatish,
it. And so in a society like Pakistan, which I know well, when that distance becomes unbridgeable, violence will bridge that distance. And in India, we didn't have violence, but we've had a profound convulsion, because that distance wasn't something that was benign or incidental. It was a distance at which other people sat and felt your contempt. So it's not optional for you anymore.
No, but I would open this question out to all three of you, which is about identity, which is that in some way, I don't think it's just politics, Aatish, I think it's also social, really, where the disenfranchised are now driven with ambition and drive and are pushing the Macaulay children away, the post-colonial cliques away, and rising to the top and pushing it hard. I think Gully Boy is actually, in some form, realistic, showing what happens. Aatish, Prayaag, you, in your book, I think you've taken you can't ignore the fact that your own identity, how you've written the book, is so cleverly done that if it was written literally or seriously exposing what you meant to expose, which one can read between the lines, wouldn't you agree that it would have been banned?
No, I don't think so.
If they understood it. If you'd written it obviously. You've written it so subtly that nobody, I think the people, the predators, let's say, didn't get it.
I hope to God people understood the book. I think what I was trying to drive at, and we were just talking about this before the panel, I think one of the things that I was trying to point to in the book was how our cities and how our urban spaces are becoming fragmented and becoming sort of atomized. And I was very interested in this and how it, because if you grow up in Delhi, and I spent some years in Bombay, the last few years in Bombay, and I noticed this in very different manifestations in both these cities. And so I became very interested in investigating that. And I think, what Aatish was talking about right now, where there's this kind of reified, there's a class of people like Macaulay, whatever you want to call them, Macaulay's children or the Lutyens elite or whatever it is. If there's this idea of this class of people who are insulated from the rest of Indian society, first of all, I'm not entirely sure that is that is accurate about India. There was always obviously this set of people who might have had control over some of the levels of power. But, to imagine that the vast population of India was not engaging and participating in this country's, process of growing up was, I think that's fallacious, because there's a lot more to India than what was happening in Delhi, in a few neighborhoods of Delhi. And I think what did happen over 40 or 50 years or whatever was that, those people sort of, there was a domination of the discourse. Like they sort of controlled what was written about and what was said about these people. So when we talk about bridging that gap, Aatish was talking about bridging that gap, I think what it is now you have more avenues of expression. And I think the internet is one of the things that has really enabled that. We didn't have, when I joined journalism in 2004, 2005, it was still very much a process-oriented. You had a senior, Vinod Mehta was our editor, and you had to try and get a story past him, and we had Nandini was our features editor, and it was still. I remember trying to do a story about Web 2.0. I'd read this term, The Guardian, and it was for people of that generation, Nandini and Vinod, they couldn't see the relevance of the story. They wanted a feature story, a straight magazine feature story. And it's something I often think back to, because then, how blogs changed, kind of blogs and websites changed how journalism works now,
See, all three of you have written...
I want to just say one thing,
yes.
because just to respond to Prayaag, cultural power is not something that, controlling the discourse is a kind of small way to say something that's much more immense. I mean, to have cultural power, to open your mouth and to be either respected or to be reviled for your things, for the things you like to wear, the things you like to read, the sort of signifiers of your culture, to be stronger or more powerful, those things matter a lot. And what India looked and felt like, at least the India I grew up in, were things where objects of great wonder and beauty, like the classical past in India, like the Indo-Persian past in India, had that they were not given due regard, that a very thin amount of cultural influence was advanced in a certain way, and people on the other side didn't feel that influence as something that was just someone else doing something else. They felt it as power, and they have responded with power. So we can't dismiss those relationships as simply different people doing different things.
See, all three of you, in some form, have written in your books about traditional versus modern. All three of you written about class and caste. And all three of you have, in some way, written about dark, descriptive areas which seem to engulf us. Yours, Prayaag, I see as soot, beige. It's really, really encompasses your book and you feel suffocated. Varanasi, some areas of your book are descriptively beautiful, but again, the filth, again the darkness comes in. And yours, Raj, your reaction to, I don't know if I should give away the book, but to an incident that happened that the country was completely shaken by. Again, your descriptives are, even in the areas where you describe as cold, they're still gray, they're still dark. All three books, in some way, the breathing that I experienced while reading them was the same. You feel suffocated in some areas. Really, the heaviness that all three have brought in your writing. Your styles are all different. Is this what you think will remain the future of India? Is there a way out of it? The darkness that all three of you have seen and written about? Raj, you first.
No,
It's not a question about the economy.
It's a very tough one. Well, I'll just kind of zoom out a bit and tell you, as all of us here, we don't know, at least I don't know why I write what I write. But I can tell you accurately the sequence of what led to this book. I remember I was in Berlin on a sabbatical working on my other book, and on December 1, snow fell for the first time in the city, and for my son, who was at that time 6 years old, it was the first time that he had seen snow in his life. And I remember that time, thanks to the phones that we have, we are condemned to remember everything. So I remember 7:02, it was a Saturday, 1st of December. About exactly 2 weeks later, and Rain, my son, was in the first, he was going to school. He was 6 years old. And about 2 weeks later was Sandy Hook, where a bunch of school kids were shot dead in the US, and they were all 6-year-olds. And there was a meeting in Rain's school about security, the usual stuff. And then 2 days later comes the rape in Delhi. And given that my life, most of my adult life has been spent in the newsroom, I was here 6,000 miles away when a big story was playing out in Delhi. And there was anger on the streets, this huge thing at India Gate. And I am stuck there, at least with 6 more months left for my leave, and completely feeling adrift. And I remember, so my son watching snow for the first time in his life, the shootout in Sandy Hook, and the rape, and the big debate in Delhi, in India, that toxic patriarchy, let's change our laws, let's lower the juvenile age, hang everybody. And the first thing I wrote, which is there, which is in kind of, it is halfway in the book, but that's the first thing I wrote, was just this scene of ghosts, of little kids, of 6-year-old ghosts playing on the beach in a sand pit that is very vast because it's the beach. And their stuff is buried in the sand pit. And a woman from Delhi is walking along the beach. So it was just an essay I wrote. Why I wrote it.
And they have bullet holes.
Yeah, why. And in a way, the book was born there. So it's a very personal impulse, as Aatish said, that why you write, it comes from some place which you do not even understand. But to me, this is my 5th book, and I have found my fiction as a place where I get space which I do not get in the newsroom. So the newsroom is a space where, to quote George Orwell, you have to be free to say 2 and 2 make 4. You need that freedom to say that 2 plus 2 make 4. But you also need a space to say that 2 plus 2, let me wait. What does 2 mean? What does 2 mean? You need that space as a human. At least I need that space. And I find that in fiction. So it is also storytelling, but which both of you here have done work. I'm sure many of you in this room have read both Aatish and Prayaag's work, journalism using the resources of fiction and fiction using the resources of journalism. So I think both feel enriched, both can be enriched in ways which we are still working on. And so to me, it was not that it's a dark world. For me, what was most important in the book was my son at the age of 6. And that is what Aatish said, the kind of histories and the backstories we have are centuries apart. My son at the age of 6 is watching snow for the first time. The juvenile in Delhi at the age of 7 had to leave home and work in a restaurant on the Ghaziabad highway. To me, as a writer, that deeply affected me in a way that I had to tackle it in some way. I'm not saying good or bad or moralizing, but it was a story.
That's the amazing part of your book, but you don't moralize what happened in spite of laying out how awful it is.
Absolutely, yeah.
You see what he's doing. I mean, this is a perfect example, is to feel oneself, to be aesthetically moved, to find something affecting. That's not darkness. I mean, what he did just now, he took these 2 incidents, 2 of them might have just been newsprint, and then it's a snowfall in Berlin, and it's something else suddenly. When the third thing comes together, it lands. God forbid it would be, but to me, like, that's uplifting. That's, for me, like, it's rare to feel like that. Scrolling through your Twitter feed for 2 hours, that's dark. That's like distressing. It's corrosive. This is uplifting.
And your book, Aatish, that when you went through, you were questioning fixed ideas in a very controlled way. If, I would have expected you to disagree much more vociferously with things which you found were superstitious, but you were still handled it like a student. For one, I'm very passive when I'm in this mode. I like people to tell their stories. I like those stories to be detailed. I'm not the sociologist. I'm not the anthropologist. I'm certainly not the social activist. And I like people for that story to unfurl. And if there is horror, and if people are unnerved, and for instance, there's a character in my book called P.K. Mukhopadhyay who has very, very painful views about caste and about especially the commensal prohibitions and the prohibitions surrounding food and marriage that a caste is associated with. And for me, that work is solely and exclusively the work of the novelist to humanize, or to go in there and to leave you with the impression that this man is a man of intelligence, of learning, of integrity, and has abhorrent views. And so me to then step in there, all elbows, and be like, how dare you say that? And that doesn't have an effect. That's an editorial. The magical moment is when you met the professor in Columbia and his reaction to Mukhopadhyay. Right. And that is really coming full circle in some way. And you went, it is remarkable. It's just how life plays itself out, and this is not fiction. It happened to you, and how it plays out in terms of affecting people and affecting you. But again, I did not mean darkness to the point of depression, because all your books, in fact, are uplifting in every way. And I come to Prayaag's. Your ending, since they've been holding that sign up, your ending is despairing, yet it's a story of survival. Can you talk about one, because I have to end, but can you talk about what brought you to the book? Why did you write this? It's simple answers, because I need to snap it up quickly now. But just to get the oppressiveness that you've written about, the oppressiveness which we are all periodically feeling in some sense. And you've written about it in colors, in the scenes, in what happens, the despairing situation. Yes.
If you don't mind, I can zoom out a little bit from your
Yes.
question and think about, why I was just thinking about why I actually started writing the book. I was listening to what Raj said about the distance between fiction and non-fiction and journalism, and I was working as a journalist when I started writing it. And one of the things that I think I started to understand when I was in, when I was working at Scroll, is that, as a writer, and this, I was actually reminded of this morning when I turned on the news after a very long time. I turned on the television news because I wanted to know what was happening in Kashmir. And I sort of flicking through the 3 or 4 channels, and I felt sorry for all of these, the TV journalists who were there, because they were all there and talking about something that it was clear they didn't have a full understanding of what was happening there. And no one exactly knows what's happening in Kashmir right now, vis-a-vis what the government policy is or what's going on.
Especially today.
Yeah, today, yeah. It's all very confusing to everyone, but, there was this kind of, all these people had to deliver some kind of message about what was happening there. And I felt sorry for them. And I think that is one of the things that I really enjoyed about writing, writing fiction, is that I was able to get away from that position of sort of, not a lack of, not no information, but a lack of, you're always responding to things as they're happening. And with fiction, it gives you a larger canvas. It gives you a longer sort of canvas to be able to think about things in perhaps a more meaningful way, or perhaps a more, at least bring more depth to the idea you want to talk about. And with my book, I think I was, that's what I wanted to do. That's what I was struggling with as, I wanted to write about what was happening in our cities, and I wanted to write about, what was happening between religious groups. I saw it in Bombay, I saw it in Delhi, and, and I actually wanted to write about how we're all kind of complicit in it. That was a very important thing to me. Growing up in Delhi, you kind of unwittingly participate in a lot of it, and perhaps even, consciously. And I wanted to, so you sort of mine your most, shameful moments. You try and think of the moment when I came home from work or something disgruntled, and I took it out in the chapel, worked in my house, like that. I tried to go into that, and then, of course, project it onto someone else in the book, because
But all 3 books actually, in different ways, touch upon exactly that how one, we are complicit, how it's all around us, and we're part of it, and how some of us push it away, turn our face away or not. I wish we had more time. Obviously, we don't. I do recommend, as I did earlier, please get these books. They are wonderful to read. Raj's, according to Kindle, you can finish in 2 hours and 10 minutes. I finished it in 1 hour and a half, less than that. Aatish's is also very quick. This one is rather long and deep. It's not long, but it's a slower read, and it requires it. So thank you, everyone. Oh, quick, we have time for 3-4 questions, quickly.
Yeah, I have the question for Raj. We have been seeing what kind of journalism is going on the TV, and what do we see? How we see journalists sowing seeds of hatred every night at 9. So, what's your take on this? Like, in which way the Indian journalism is going, or is independent journalism is alive? Like Newslaundry is doing a good thing, or there are some media outlets, but the majority of the audience ना जो कि if I can say in Hindi, जो कि देख रहे हैं इसको, वो इन चैनल्स को ही देख रहे हैं, या फिर जो कि न्यूज़ लॉन्ड्री जैसे वेबसाइट्स को नहीं एक्सेस कर पा रहे हैं, बिकॉज उनके पास शायद टीवी है लेकिन शायद मोबाइल फ़ोन नहीं है. तो जो टीवी पे जो एक हेट्रेड फैलाया जा रहा है, जो कि हिंदी न्यूज़ चैनल्स में भी और इंग्लिश न्यूज़ चैनल्स में भी, तो व्हाट्स योर टेक ऑन कि इंडिपेंडेंट जर्नलिज्म इन इंडिया किस तरफ जा रहा है, और या फिर अगर जा भी रहा है तो?
One is, then for that to happen, we need Mr. Vineet Jain, Sameer Jain, Shobna Bhartiya, other people on this stage, not us. I think they need to talk, and they need to reflect and discuss, and they need to be asked that. But that said, I think we also exaggerate, and sorry if I deflate the bubble. I think we also exaggerate that there's too much of bad. There's some very good work happening as well. And thanks to the internet, as you know, saying, there is amazing journalism happening. There is good work happening. Now, it is up to us to define. It is up to us to see where we go, and why do people watch X and why do people watch Y. This is much, much beyond my pay grade. But what I can say is that, you know, as long as those of us in this room, journalists and writers, we have to, you know, when you said at the end that why do you write, the other reason is we don't have to vote every half an hour. I think what has happened in the last 5 or 6 years, there's this incredible pressure on each one of us. Each one of us in this room is fairly smart, imaginative, articulate. We read and we write. Where were you when this dark abyss had stared you in the face? Did you stand up? You know, there are times when you say, you know what, I do not know enough to stand up. So let me think. And I think that space in the middle, I think we have completely abdicated that space in the middle, leaving it to both sides to scream. And I think that space in the middle has to be reclaimed. For me, fiction also does that very powerfully. In fiction, I'm not pro, anti anybody. And I think that is important, you know, for many of you in this room who will be the editors next 4 or 5 years or 10 years. You know, we are all old. We are all going away. But you guys are going to lead the newsrooms. That middle space is important. That, you know, I don't have to vote every time. I don't have to be liked every time. You know, social media, you know, things which we never thought 15 years ago. That you tell me every morning that I'm wonderful. I see husbands wishing wives happy birthday on social media.
You are wonderful.
You know, you tell, you know, and this pressure that did you stand, it's 1932 Germany. It is not 1933 Germany. Let's face it. Let's study, understand history. That, you know, let us do our job better. There was a wonderful line that, you know, all these books are coming out, save capitalism from capitalists. I think it's time to save journalism from journalists. This whole thing that, you know, you have to, you know, how did you, look, if we are in the storytelling business, which all of us are, we have to be aware of our biases. I don't want X to win the election, deep down. And I'm perfectly legitimate to have that feeling. But when I go to do a story, I should be aware of that bias. If I don't want X to win this election, I need to speak to 10 times the number of people who vote for X than who vote for Y. It is like if my dad is wheeled into the intensive care unit, I don't want a doctor who says, I don't believe in anesthesia. I don't like anesthesia. I'm sorry, you know, when in the hospital, it doesn't matter if a doctor is BJP or Congress, because we have faith in the hospital's institutional processes, that when it comes to the surgery, there is no personal feelings.
I think there's a danger of our minds being Twitterized to a degree.
Absolutely. No, which you said in your first speech.
Yes.
Yesterday.
So that is something that we need to watch for, as well as viewers and readers being trained to not know the difference of, you know, when to stop, actually, to just let, that you don't have to react to every instance. And that's a problem also with reporters, because I find that the reports are coming out, the writing is coming out like they're writing for Twitter. And that is a big danger. Aatish, your closing remarks on what he said? Or response to him?
No, I have none. Let's have a question.
Yeah,
Yes,
so you had a question for me. And
Your
not
response?
my father. Response to what he said? I think Raj answered that question very eloquently.
Okay.
I didn't...
After this, I retire. One last question. Go ahead.
Hi, Ishwarya here. So, being somebody who's just started journalism 2 years back, I have grown up watching somebody like Ravish Kumar putting up stories like that, and growing up watching, I'm going to outright and say that, a channel like NDTV and the kind of journalism that they have done. And now being in an industry where everybody, it's almost become like a mouthpiece, majority of channels, I would say. So I'm really scared about the fact that for somebody as young as I am, how will I ever, like the kind of work that I've looked forward to, being in the broadcast media, which has completely changed its discourse, like it really scares me that how am I going to put forward my content when there is so much of restriction there, when I don't have the space to do it anymore. So, like, there are channels that are shutting down because, they're not in sync with what the government wants to say or how the kind of content they would want to see on a regular basis. So how do we go about it? How do we still keep that sanity and where do we have the platform to show the kind of work that we really want to do? Because probably if I'm in the industry for a few more years, it'll be, I don't want to get molded in a way where, I'm working in a way where how the organization wants me to, or in a particular way, because in few years, maybe I will also get molded into the same way because I haven't. So the question is that for all the young journalists that are here and who aspire to actually give good stories out, what would you advise them, especially in a time that is as difficult as this is?
Raj, I would like to hear that answer.
First, I would tell you that, watch everything, build your bullshit detector inside your head, and build your CV, tell stories. Convince the people who have the power to hire you or the power to give you a paycheck, or that you can tell a story fairly and very, very accurately. And there will be places, there are places, let's not, paint this picture that, everything is over and it's the end of the world. It is not,
And also, I think there has to be less of I.
Yeah.
And there's too much of I want to do this, I want to do that. They're not letting me do this. Listen, I've been in this profession for now 47 or 48 years. You start off with writing about fires, you write obituaries, you don't get a byline. It's wonderful that, you can put a blog out with your name and everything, but I think there is a time for some humility that instead of pushing for your space, first learn from people who have made the space and understand that it takes time to get where you want to be instantly. It takes time to learn, it takes time to reflect, and it takes time for your journey. Look at the journey these people have taken. It's not small. You want it now. You want it yesterday. I'm sorry. I don't support that. I do think there's a space where you have to take time to learn. And accept that maybe you don't know everything. Yeah, you can, as I said, you can say, I think, I know, I posted, therefore I am. But really, what are you? First, figure that out. When you figured out, which is something that people have asked in their books, where am I? Who am I? What am I? When you figure that out, then start writing. We have to stop now. I'm sorry. We'll thank you very much, Raj. It's been a treat. Aatish, thank you for coming all the way from New York, and Prayaag.